guys, Christy here from the Stamp Cycle, and welcome to another video from my YouTube channel and blog. So for today's card, we're going to be creating a really cool background with some Distress Oxide inks and some of the Stampin' Up! Embossing paste. And then we're also going to be using this adorable little pig from the This Little Piggy stamp set that's in the 2017-2018 annual catalog from Stampin' Up! So to create this background, I'm using this Distress Oxide ink. This is Salty Ocean, I do believe. Distress Oxide inks are so much fun to play with. They create the most beautiful backgrounds. And the cool thing about Distress Oxide inks, if you're not familiar with them, is they are a combination of pigment ink and dye ink. So they react really well with water, but they give this beautiful like chalky like finish. So I just have a piece of watercolor paper here and a piece of acetate. I just smushed that Distress Oxide ink pad directly onto that acetate, sprayed it with water, and then just tapped it down on my watercolor paper. I'm going to do this several times, but the key is to dry it completely before you add more ink. This gives a really cool layered look. Distress oxides really do a great job in layering on top of each other. So I just do this again and again, drying between each layer until I get the desired look. I wanted to get a lot of those little specks of ink you see, and so I just use that acetate to get the look that I was going for. So while that background's drying, I'm going to get out the This Little Piggy stamp set, and I'm going to work on that circular focal image for my card. So I have another just scrap piece of watercolor paper, and I'm going to stamp that little flying pig on there because I want to watercolor that so it matches our background. So I've just treated my watercolor paper with my stamping buddy or my embossing buddy. And then I'm just going to use some Versamark ink, and I'm just going to ink up the little pig. I'm not worried about the sentiment at this point, so I've just inked up the pig, and I've stamped that down, and now I'm going to just apply some fine detailed white embossing powder. And then I'm just going to tap off all the excess, funnel that back in, and heat set that with my heat tool. So I'm going to use some additional Distress Oxide inks to watercolor this little pig in. So I just have my craft mat here, and I just smushed the ink pad directly down onto my craft mat, and I've just added some water to it to dilute it down because I want to add several layers of this pink Distress Oxide onto this little piggy image to give it some depth and shadows. So I'm just using I think this is a number 4 round brush here, and I'm just applying first that initial very light wash of the Distress Oxide, and this color is Worn Lipstick. And I'm just going in and I'm making the areas where the shadows would be darker than the rest of those back legs. Have a little more ink than, let's say, the middle of the tummy. So that gives this pig some shadows and really makes it look a little more realistic. So now again, I'm taking some of that Salty Ocean and I'm going to apply this to the wings of the pig. And first for this part, I'm going to add clean clear water first because I really want this blue to be very, very light and pale. Now for the pink part of the pig, I applied that ink directly onto the paper without wetting the paper first. So if you wet your paper first, you get a softer look for the ink. So that's what I did here for the wings. So now I really want to distress this background now that it's dry. So I've just used my distress sprayer, and then I'm also going to use this just other little water bottle I have and tap on some big drops. The cool thing about, like I said, distress inks, even the oxides, is that they really react with water. So by putting down all of these water droplets, I get this really cool distress background with a lot of neat little water drop effects. So now I'm just going to add some finishing touches to this pig. I have a Jelly Roll glaze black pen. I'm going to color the hoofs, and I'm going to accent the eye and then also the little snout on that pig so that it really sticks out. And then to add some other cute little details, I've just got a white gel pen here, and I'm just going to add some little freckles onto its cheek and then some little freckles onto its butt. And I thought that gave the pig a cute little look. So now the fun part begins, and I'm going to fussy cut this pig out. These do not have coordinating dies, but the pig is super easy to cut out with your paper snips. So I'm just going to cut this little pig out, and then we'll be ready to adhere him to the circle. So before I start working on the rest of the little focal image with the pig, I want to add some glittery clouds to my background. So I've got these really fun masks from Stampin' Up, and I've got Stampin' Up Dazzling Diamonds glitter and also the embossing paste. So I just taped down that stencil to on top of my background piece. I just brought out some of the embossing paste onto my craft mat, and I added a nice scoop of that Dazzling Diamonds glitter. Mix that up really well, and now I'm just going to apply this all over the stencil, making sure that I'm pushing that embossing paste into the cloud parts of the stencil, really getting good coverage in those clouds. And just moving this embossing paste around till I get the look that I'm going for. For this image, I wanted to make sure all of the clouds were filled with embossing paste. And you know, I use several of the different palette knives that Stampin' Up has. They all do a really good job, and so I find that using a combination of a couple of them allows me to really get an even coverage of this embossing paste, but also use the knives to scrape off each other so that I get really zero waste when I'm using the embossing paste. Now I did run out, so I had to get a little bit more out there onto my craft mat, add some glitter, and then continue to apply this. You know, it's hard to gauge how much you need, but the good thing is that Stampin' Up embossing paste I find cleans up really well. So I wasn't too worried about the embossing paste getting hardened or stuck onto my surface here, because I find that it cleans up really well with just some soapy warm water, and I just use a nail brush. But there is the final look. You have those beautiful sparkly glittery clouds. And so like I said, you want to make sure you take all of those tools to your sink and clean it immediately. And so now we're just going to work on the rest of the focal point of the card while that embossing paste dries. So I've got my stitch shapes and then my layering circles, and I'm going to cut out the stitched circle from some vellum, and then that scallop circle that layers perfectly with that stitch circle, that's going to be that's some, what is that, Flirty Flamingo cardstock. So then I also stamped that She Believes She Could sentiment on a piece of black cardstock. I white heat embossed that and then just trimmed it down to be a just a nice square sentiment there. And then I'm going to put all these pieces together. So I'm just adding some foam adhesive behind my pig and then also behind my sentiment strip here. And then I'm going to adhere those directly onto this vellum circle. So the great thing about adhering things like this directly onto the circle is you can hide the adhesive now on this vellum. Vellum is hard to hide adhesive behind. So the key to this is when you add the glue to glue this down on that Flirty Flamingo circle is to make sure you keep your adhesive behind the pig and that sentiment strip so that you can't see the adhesive once this is all glued down together. But I love how these stitch circles really layer up with the scalloped shapes that come in oval, square, and circles. They really do go well together. So now I've just put a clear block on that to make sure it adheres nice and strong there. And now I'm just going to put the rest of my card together. I have an A2 top folding card base made out of some thick Whisper White. Then I have a layer of that same Flirty Flamingo cardstock that we used to cut out the scallop circle. I'm going to adhere these down onto this card base just using some Tombow multi-purpose glue. Like I've mentioned in several times before in my videos, I like to use the Tombow glue because it gives you those few seconds that you can really wiggle around your panels to get perfect placement. I'm going to use, again, that same glue to glue down my watercolor background here. If you find that your watercolor panel is really warped, you might want to run it through your Big Shot between a piece of typing paper before you add your embossing paste clouds. That will flatten it out quite a bit and you won't get quite as much warping. So once I have glued all of these layers down together, I'm really pressing that down and making sure that that watercolor paper really does get nice and adhered. I'm just going to come in with that same Tombow glue, apply that to the back of my little circle that I've created here, and then I'll glue that to the bottom lower right-hand corner of my card. And then that is going to finish off the card for today. So if you have not tried embossing paste, I really encourage you to check out Stampin' Up's embossing paste. It is super easy to work with. It cleans up easily, and you can do a lot of really cool techniques with it. Like I added glitter to it for this card, but I've also added re-inkers. You can also heat emboss the embossing paste with gold embossing powder. You can do all kinds of things with it. So I really encourage you to pick some up and give it a try. And that is my card for today. So here's the one I created before and the one I created during the video. Thank you guys for joining me today. If you have any questions, head on over to my blog at www.thestampcycle.com, and all the supplies will be linked below in the YouTube description. Thanks. Bye.